In the quiet rolling hills of Hocking County, Ohio, the town of Logan felt like a place where the old-world values of faith and family still held firm. Among its residents, the Inman family was often seen as the gold standard of Christian devotion and moral integrity. William Bill Inman, the patriarch, was a man who didn't just attend church. He radiated a certain kind of charismatic authority that commanded absolute respect. Alongside his wife Sandra, they presented a picture-perfect union that had lasted since their teenage years in 1983. To the outside world, the Inman household was a sanctuary of harmony, a beacon of light in a modern world. They were the ones in the front pews every Sunday, their voices raised in song, their hands always ready to offer a blessing to those in need. But as any student of true crime knows, the brightest light often casts the deepest, most distorted shadows across the soul. Within the privacy of their esteemed home, a different kind of gospel was being preached, one of absolute dominance, psychological isolation, and a slow-burning madness. This madness would eventually culminate in a crime so cold-blooded it would leave the entire state of Ohio in a state of shock. In 1984, the couple welcomed their son William Jr., known to everyone as Will, who was molded from birth. From the moment he could walk, Will was shaped in his father's image, taught that the man was the undisputed head of the spiritual house. He was raised to believe that a husband was a king, whose word was law, and whose control over his family was divine. In 2001, history seemed to repeat itself in the most idyllic way when a 17-year-old Will met 15-year-old Summer Cook at church. It was a meeting reminiscent of his parents' own origin story, appearing to be a match made in heaven by the community. After a 3-year courtship, the moment Summer turned 18, they were wed in a ceremony full of hope. Summer, young and full of dreams, moved into the large Inman residence, unaware that she wasn't just joining a family but entering a cult. By 2004, Bill Inman's religious fervor had taken a megalomaniacal turn as he no longer wanted to be just a member of a congregation. He transformed his garage into a makeshift sanctuary, declaring himself a minister and inviting the public to witness his self-styled brand of faith. Neighbors were initially skeptical, but Bill had a magnetic pull that drew people in, seeking solace in his prayers and his garage. Soon, the garage church was drawing crowds, and people began to leave financial offerings to the man they trusted. Despite the influx of donations, the family's financial foundations were built on sand, and Bill's spiritual ambitions simply did not pay the bills. In 2006, the entire clan, Bill, Sandra, Will, Summer, and their newborn son Alex, relocated to Florida in search of a new financial beginning. They worked in construction, building hotels by day and maintaining their tight-knit insular world by night, away from any outside influence. But the Florida sun couldn't bleach out the toxicity brewing within the family hierarchy, as the men tightened their grip on the women. By 2008, they were back in Ohio, having lost their Logan home and settled into a rural rental. The family continued to grow with the arrival of 2 daughters, Kelly and Alana, adding more weight to Summer's domestic responsibilities under their roof. On the surface, Bill Inman was reaching his peak, obtaining a formal pastor's license and founding the Ranch of Mercy for the homeless. He launched a massive lottery, selling tickets for $10 with the promise of a $200,000 grand prize, amassing over $1 million. But while Bill was playing the role of the benevolent savior, the atmosphere inside his own home had turned into a nightmare. Summer Inman was no longer a wife in a partnership. She had become a captive in a psychological and physical cage. In the quiet hours of the night, while the rest of the house slept, Summer began to document her reality in a secret diary. Her words, discovered much later by investigators, serve as a haunting testament to her suffering and her desperate desire for basic human freedom. "I'm so tired of pleasing everyone," she wrote in one entry. "I'm exhausted. I'm just a slave running around following their orders." The level of control Will exerted over Summer was pathological, extending to every minute detail of her daily existence in the house. She was not permitted to use a phone, had no access to car keys, and her diet was strictly monitored. Even her sleep was a privilege that had to be granted by Will, and she was often confined to the home for days. Will began to speak openly about polygamy, browsing websites for sister wives, and threatening her with violence if she ever tried to leave. When her pet cats mysteriously vanished, Will laughed, claiming they simply escaped through a window. Though Summer knew the truth was darker, the message was clear. In this house, things that Summer loved had a habit of disappearing if they didn't serve the family. By June 2010, the spirit that Bill and Will had tried to crush finally flickered back to life within her. Summer decided she was done with the abuse and the Ranch of Mercy facade, taking her children and fleeing to her parents' home. For the first time in her adult life, she could breathe without permission and speak without fear of immediate divine or physical retribution. She found a job cleaning a bank in downtown Logan and even began a new relationship with a man named Adam Peters. But for the Inmans, Summer's departure wasn't just a divorce. It was a theft of their property and a public humiliation. They viewed her freedom as a personal insult to their religious authority and a threat to their carefully constructed social image. The fall of 2010 saw the Inman family's world begin to crumble as the Ranch of Mercy lottery was exposed as a complete fraud. No house was built, no prize was awarded, and the $1 million had seemingly vanished into the Inman's private and hidden bank accounts. Simultaneously, they were being evicted from their rental for unpaid rent, their holy reputation in tatters, and they blamed Summer for their fall. When Summer and Adam tried to retrieve her remaining belongings in December, the confrontation turned violent as the Inman men showed their true faces. Will threatened Adam and assaulted a police officer, leading to a restraining order that legally barred him from approaching his estranged wife. To the Inmans, the secular law was an irrelevant nuisance compared to their own distorted sense of justice and their need for total revenge. They began to track her every move, learning her schedule and knowing she cleaned the bank late at night when the streets were empty. They prepared a white Ford Crown Victoria, a car that looked like an unmarked police vehicle, and they waited for the perfect moment. March 22, 2011 arrived, and the clock struck 11 p.m. in Logan as Summer Inman finished her shift at the bank alone. It was a cold night, and she stepped out into the alleyway to take out the trash, thinking of her future. She had just texted Adam to meet her when the white Crown Victoria pulled up and the doors flew open in the dark. Two men in black balaclavas leapt from the vehicle, acting in a terrifying, synchronized harmony that suggested they had practiced this many times. They grabbed her, and despite her desperate screams and the way she fought with every ounce of her strength, they began the abduction. Two joggers passing by froze in disbelief at the violence unfolding before their eyes, unsure if it was real or a nightmare. A bystander tried to rush to Summer's aid, but the driver of the car, the grandmother, Sandra Inman, leaned out and fired pepper spray. The intervention was neutralized by the chemical burn, and Summer was shoved into the back seat as the doors slammed shut forever. The car roared out of the alley, disappearing into the darkness of the Ohio night before anyone could record the license plate or help. By the time Adam Peters arrived at the bank minutes later, the alley was silent, and the love of his life was gone. He found Summer's phone and keys scattered in the dirt, her music player still on the ground with the headphones still plugged in. Her jacket lay in the grass like a discarded skin, a chilling sign of the struggle that had taken place moments before. For the next 72 hours, Logan, Ohio became the center of a media firestorm, as hundreds of volunteers joined the police in a search. Every abandoned barn, every wooded acre, and every creek was scrutinized by people praying for a miracle that would never come to pass. But the police weren't looking for a random kidnapper. The description of the car and the blonde woman pointed to the Inman family. When investigators tracked down the white Crown Victoria, they found zip ties, a tarp, and a bottle of bleach inside the trunk. The Inman family, Bill, Sandra, and Will, were taken into custody, initially holding their holy facade with stone-faced and eerie silence. But the pressure of a capital murder charge eventually cracked the foundation of their silence, and Sandra was the first to finally break. She led investigators to a remote church in Athens County, a place of worship that had become a place of unspeakable, cold-blooded murder. There, behind the church, in a septic tank, they found Summer's body, hidden away as if she were nothing more than common household waste. She had been strangled with a zip tie, a death so clinical and cruel it defied the comprehension of the seasoned officers. The Inmans hadn't just killed her, they had tried to erase her very existence from the earth in an act of pure spite. The trial of the Inman family was a descent into the heart of human depravity, exposing a family that had collectively chosen murder. The prosecution proved that the $1 million from the lottery was gone, spent on a lifestyle of control and the tools for this crime. In the end, justice was as heavy as the stone that covered Summer's grave, and the Holy family was cast into prison. Bill, Sandra, and Will Inman were all sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, their Ranch of Mercy revealed as a horror. Summer Inman's story remains a reminder that predators can hide in the pews, waiting for the light to go out on the innocent. As the investigation deepened, a single image on Facebook became a catalyst for rage. Summer had posted a photo of her new life, smiling alongside her partner Adam and her children. To Will Inman, who strangely remained on Adam's friends list, this wasn't just a picture. It was a public declaration of his loss of ownership. The irony was bitter, as Adam had originally been hired by the Inmans themselves in 2010 for household chores. It was under their own roof that Adam and Summer first locked eyes, sparking a bond that Summer's diary described as a war between her heart and her rigid upbringing. She wrote of feeling as though the devil had taken hold of her because she dared to love someone outside the family's iron grip. This internal conflict eventually gave way to a desperate pursuit of happiness, leading her to file for divorce. The legal battle that followed was a demeaning spectacle, with Will contesting every penny of child support. Despite the Inmans' claims of being a wealthy, chosen family, Will suggested paying a mere $50 a month, claiming he earned next to nothing. When the court rejected their petition for full custody, Bill and Sandra began to physically deteriorate from the perceived slight. By March 2011, as the search for the missing mother intensified, the police tracked the Inmans to Bill's mother's house in Jackson County. The family presented a united front of calculated ignorance, spinning a tall tale about a midnight trip to Cleveland that was thwarted by car trouble. They sat before investigators with practiced calm, painting Adam Peters as the villain who had dismantled their once harmonious home. However, the Inmans' technological oversight would soon be their undoing, as the very vehicle they used for the crime held the evidence of their lies within its digital memory. Detectives seized a GPS receiver from their white Ford Crown Victoria, which told a story far different from their Cleveland alibi. The data showed the car was in Logan on the night of the abduction, with the device being manually deactivated just as the crime began. Phone records placed all three family members at the scene of the kidnapping, not on a dark highway miles away. Further evidence emerged from a local car wash where the trio had been seen scrubbing the interior of the car at dawn. They were even spotted replacing perfectly good tires with used ones to alter the car's profile. The pressure in the interrogation room became unbearable as the evidence mounted against them. While Bill assured his mother that this was simply a test from the devil, the reality of a death sentence began to weigh heavily on Sandra. After hours of grueling questioning, the matriarch's resolve finally shattered into pieces. She confessed that the mission on March 22nd was her design, though she claimed it was only meant to be an intimidation tactic. She described the horror of the backseat as Will used plastic zip ties to bind Summer's neck, hands, and feet in a frenzy. Sandra recounted a moment of sudden, panicked realization when Will noticed Summer had stopped breathing. He reportedly screamed for a knife to cut the ties, but it was already too late for the young mother. According to Sandra, their only goal was to force Summer into a custody agreement, never intending for the encounter to turn fatal. On March 29, 2011, a week after the disappearance, Sandra led police to the final resting place. It was a location of twisted significance, a septic tank on the grounds of the very church where Bill and Sandra had married decades earlier. The scene was gruesome beyond words, as investigators removed a heavy concrete slab and unscrewed the metal lid of the well. They were met with the sight of Summer's legs. She had been unceremoniously dumped headfirst into the waste. She was still wearing her work shirt, which bore the hauntingly prophetic phrase, "I don't have anger issues, I have issues with idiots." The autopsy confirmed the cause of death as slow, agonizing strangulation. There were no other marks on her body, only the deep, bruised indentations of the zip ties that had stolen her life in the back of that car. During the 2012 trial, the male Inmans remained chillingly stoic, refusing to look at Summer's grieving parents or offer a single word of remorse. Only Sandra showed emotion, weeping openly and begging for forgiveness, claiming she loved Summer like a daughter. However, those who knew the family's inner workings remained skeptical of her mastermind confession. They knew Bill was the true architect of every family decision, and they believed Sandra was simply falling on her sword to protect her husband and son from the ultimate penalty. It was a final act of loyalty to a toxic patriarchy. In the end, the scales of justice leveled the Inman dynasty. Bill and Will were sentenced to spend the rest of their natural lives behind bars without the hope of parole. Sandra received a life sentence, though she remains eligible for parole after 15 years of incarceration. The children, Alex, Kelly, and Alana, are now being raised by Summer's family, far away from the shadow of the Inman name. For years, the family struggled to explain to the children why their father and grandparents simply vanished. Summer's light was extinguished by those who claimed to be her protectors, leaving behind a legacy of survival. If this story moved you, please like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into the shadows of the human heart. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next video. Is a human being merely a reflection of their environment, or are our deeds the cold, hard consequence of personal choice? There is an old adage that whispers a haunting truth. Everything we possess in life, we have either earned or permitted. On a gloomy evening in March 2010, the humid air of Escambia County, Florida, was shattered by the wail of sirens. Paramedics arrived at a residence to find a scene that defied human comprehension. A 19-year-old girl lay broken, the victim of an assault so savage it bordered on the ritualistic. Her wounds were grave, her skin had darkened, charring under the weight of unthinkable cruelty, literally sloughing off her frame. Yet, through the haze of agony and the stench of burnt flesh, she found the strength to whisper the names of the fiends who had unmade her. To understand how such evil takes root in a mobile home park, we must look back 40 years, to the making of a woman named Tina Brown. Tina LaSonia Brown was born in July 1970 to Lily and Willie Coleman. They were children raising children, a union forged in immaturity. When Tina's brother, Willie Jr., arrived just 11 months later, the household became a vacuum of neglect. The youthful parents prioritized the neon lights of the social scene over the cries of their offspring. By the age of 5, Tina wasn't a child. She was a surrogate mother. She cooked the meals, scrubbed the floors, and walked her brother to school. But the domestic dysfunction soon turned deadly. Willie Sr. traded his soul for the gang life, peddling poison on street corners. In 1982, an explosion of violence saw Willie Sr. nearly kill his wife Lily. With no one to shield her, Tina became the target. The white powder moved through the house like a ghost, and the physical abuse followed. When Tina sought refuge with her grandmother, she was met not with open arms but with a closed heart. The elderly woman banished her, branding her a liar to protect the image of her son. Tina returned to the house of horrors, where the assaults resumed with a new dark intensity. The entry of Melinda, a stepmother defined by aggression and promiscuity, marked the end of Tina's childhood and the beginning of her damnation. The household became a cauldron of alcohol and psychotropic drugs. Melinda didn't just neglect Tina, she exploited her, coercing the teenager into selling her body to fund the family's addictions. By the time the FBI finally shuttered the operation and sent Willie Sr. to prison, the damage was systemic. Tina tried to live with her mother, but the friction of two broken women living under one roof sparked constant fires. Tina was kicked out again. She was a nomad of the underworld, drifting through schools, eventually clawing her way to a diploma that felt like a participation trophy in a life of trauma. She met Greg Miller, a fellow addict. They had children, but the cycle repeated. The babies were born into the gray haze of synthetic substances. It was only during her third pregnancy, with her daughter Brittany, that Tina briefly glimpsed the light. She entered rehab, gave up her first 2 children for adoption to her mother, and fought to keep Brittany. For 4 years she was a mother. For 4 years she was clean, but the gravity of her past was too strong. Tina's subsequent marriage ended when her husband was hauled off for drug distribution. She became a bartender, subconsciously gravitating toward the very men who mirrored the father who broke her. Her life became a repetitive loop of violent partners, fraudulent checks, and exotic dancing. In 2009, seeking a final fresh start, Tina moved to Pensacola, Florida. She settled into a mobile home park with her daughter, Brittany. To the outside world, they were struggling survivors. But beneath the surface, the poverty and the pressure were cooking something volatile. To make ends meet, Tina began offering intimate services again, reportedly including the husband of her best friend, Heather Lee. It was in this claustrophobic world of thin walls and shared secrets that they met Audreanna Zimmerman. Audreanna was only 19, a single mother of 2 small children, Trinity and David. Like Tina, she was drowning in the financial demands of a life without a safety net. She looked to her neighbors, Tina, the 39-year-old veteran of the streets, and Brittany, the 16-year-old daughter, for a sense of community. But in the pressure cooker of a mobile home park, friendship is often just a precursor to a feud. The air turned sour. Petty squabbles over men and money escalated into calls to the police. Audreanna was terrified when Tina reported her to the Department of Children and Families, threatening the one thing Audreanna loved, her kids. In retaliation, tires were slashed, car windows were shattered. Then came the spark that lit the fuse. Brittany, the 16-year-old, discovered that Audreanna had allegedly slept with her boyfriend. The teenager attacked the mother. The mother defended herself with a stun gun. To a normal person, this is a neighborhood dispute. To Tina Brown, who had been beaten by her father and discarded by her mother, this was a declaration of war. She didn't call the police. She didn't seek mediation. She sought retribution. On March 24, 2010, the trap was set. Tina reached out to Audreanna with a silver tongue, offering a truce. She invited her over to the trailer to bury the hatchet and rekindle their friendship. Audreanna, feeling isolated and desperate for peace, walked into the lion's den. Inside the trailer sat a grim committee: Tina, her daughter Brittany, their neighbor Heather Lee, and a 13-year-old girl named Mallory. Before Audreanna arrived, Brittany had pulled Mallory aside with a chilling warning: "Watch what we do to her. If you tell anyone, you're next." At 9 p.m., Audreanna knocked. Within minutes, the truce was revealed as a massacre. The attack began with the very weapon that had started the final feud: a stun gun. Multiple shocks sent Audreanna to the floor, her muscles seizing, her mind plunging into a state of primal terror. She pleaded for mercy. She called for help. But help was not coming. Heather Lee, rather than stopping the madness, became an accomplice. As Audreanna lay paralyzed, a dirty rag was stuffed into her mouth to silence her cries. What followed was not a fight. It was a systematic dismantling of a human being. They beat her with boards. They kicked her until her ribs gave way. But Tina Brown wanted more than pain. She wanted a mark that would never fade. Tina fetched a container of caustic chemicals, ammonia and bleach, and poured it over the girl's broken body. The chemical reaction began to eat Audreanna's skin alive. Not satisfied with chemical burns, Tina ignited a lighter. The 19-year-old mother was turned into a human torch. As the flames took hold, the friends watched. When the fire grew too large for the small trailer, they dragged her outside like a piece of trash, doused her again, and continued the assault in the woods behind the park. They left her for dead, a charred husk in the Florida brush. But Audreanna Zimmerman possessed a will to live that shocked even her tormentors. She crawled. Through the dirt, through the agonizing pain of skin sloughing off her muscles, she reached a nearby house. When paramedics arrived, they didn't see a woman, they saw a casualty of war. Despite the trauma, Audreanna spoke. She gave the names. She gave the location. She ensured that the cycle of silence her own family had practiced would end with her. The arrests were swift. The mobile home park, a place of transient lives, became a crime scene that would haunt the investigators for decades. Tina Brown, the woman who had once been a victim herself, had become the ultimate victimizer. Her defense attempted to lean on her history of abuse, the cycles of violence that had shaped her. But the court saw the premeditation. They saw the 13-year-old she had forced to witness the crime. They saw the charred remains of a 19-year-old's future. In the end, the law did what Tina's family never could. It held her accountable. The tragedy of Escambia County is a reminder that while we cannot choose where we come from, we are the sole authors of where we go. And some paths lead directly into the heart of darkness. The thick, humid air inside the trailer was heavy with tension, a silence that was suddenly shattered by the sharp, electric crackle of a stun gun. Audreanna Zimmerman, who had walked through that door expecting a reconciliation, was instead met with a bolt of lightning that surged through her nervous system. As she collapsed, paralyzed and vibrating from the shock, the betrayal turned physical. A filthy rag was shoved into her mouth, silencing her pleas before they could even form. Brittany, fueled by a teenage rage that had fermented into something truly murderous, delivered a crushing blow to the young mother's face. In that moment, the transition was complete. To Tina and Brittany, Audreanna was no longer a neighbor or a friend. She was a nuisance to be discarded like common refuse. They hauled her limp, semi-conscious body toward the driveway, the gravel crunching under their feet as they shoved her into the dark, claustrophobic confines of a car trunk. Tina Brown took the wheel with a cold, predatory focus. Beside her sat her daughter and Heather Lee, leaving 13-year-old Mallory behind in the trailer. A child left to scrub away the copper-scented bloodstains of a crime that was only just beginning its descent into darkness. The car moved through the night, a metal tomb on wheels, driving a mile and a half into the suffocating depths of the Florida woods. They reached a lonely, moonlit glade, far from the prying eyes and thin walls of the mobile home park. When the trunk finally creaked open, the sudden rush of fresh air and the sight of the dark canopy above triggered a final, desperate instinct in Audreanna. Adrenaline momentarily overrode the searing agony of her injuries. She bolted. She ran with the impossible speed of a mother who knew her two small children were waiting for her at home. For a single heartbeat, she thought she had escaped the nightmare, until the forest itself seemed to conspire against her. A thick tree root caught her foot, and she tumbled hard into the dirt. The darkness of the woods effectively sealed her fate. Tina and Brittany were on her in seconds, descending like scavengers. What followed was a ritual of degradation that defied human empathy. They passed their weapons back and forth, a heavy crowbar and the stun gun, taking turns to torment the girl who lay helpless at their feet. There was a perverse delight in their movements, a rhythmic cruelty underscored by the dull thud of metal against bone and the acrid smell of ozone from the taser. Brittany struck with such uncontrolled, savage ferocity that she actually fractured her own finger against Audreanna's skull, but she barely seemed to notice the pain. She was lost in the high of the assault. But for Tina Brown, blunt force was insufficient to satisfy her malice. She returned to the vehicle and retrieved a red plastic canister. As Audreanna lay prone, her vision blurred by blood, staring up at the woman she had once trusted, Tina drenched her. The cold, biting scent of gasoline filled the air, soaking into Audreanna's hair and clothes. With the casual flick of a lighter, the glade erupted in a sickening incandescent orange glow. The three attackers stood back as the fire took hold. They watched the unthinkable. They watched as the girl's skin charred and sloughed away from her frame. Brittany, caught in a manic trance of pure psychopathy, began to leap up and down with excitement. She cheered for the flames, screaming for Audreanna to burn. They stood there until the screams died down to a low moan, then nonchalantly climbed back into their vehicle. In their arrogance, they believed the forest would keep their secrets. They left behind a trail of physical evidence. A pair of white shoes, the bloodied crowbar, and the taser. Tina believed her plan was meticulous, but her actions were the chaotic spasms of a mind that viewed human life as disposable. They assumed no one would go looking for a girl like Audreanna. They were wrong. Against every law of medicine, biology, and nature, Audreanna Zimmerman rose. Charred, blinded by pain that no words can describe, and reeking of gasoline, she began to move. She dragged herself through the underbrush for nearly a mile, driven by a primal will to survive. She eventually reached the porch of Terrence Hendrick, a man who was preparing for bed when he heard what he thought was a ghost whispering in the wind. When he stepped onto his porch, he saw a silhouette moving in agonizing slow motion. A figure so blackened by fire that he could not distinguish where her clothes ended and her raw, exposed skin began. Her jaw was shattered, making her words almost unrecognizable. But she managed to whisper the names that would ensure her killers never walked free again. When the paramedics arrived, the scene was one of pure horror. 90% of Audreanna's body was covered with severe, life-threatening burns. Her skin peeled away like scorched paper at the slightest touch of a sterile bandage. She had a mission. While being loaded into the ambulance, she gave the doctors the names of her tormentors. She gave them the addresses. And then, with her final breaths of consciousness, she begged for protection for her children, Trinity and David. Even as her nervous system began to shut down, the heart of a mother remained the strongest part of her being. Audreanna battled for 16 agonizing days in the intensive care unit of a burn center. She was held in a medically induced coma while investigators used her dying declaration to tear apart the web of lies back at the mobile home park. The killer's alibis were pathetic. Tina claimed she had been watching movies. Heather claimed she was cooking fish. But the evidence was undeniable. Audreanna's blood was found in the car, and her DNA was fused to the weapons they had discarded. The final, chilling betrayal was revealed during the investigation. Tina, hearing that Audreanna had miraculously survived the initial fire and was clinging to life in the hospital, reached out to a friend. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She asked if the friend would go to the hospital to finish what they had started, to murder Audreanna in her hospital bed. That friend, horrified, went to the authorities instead. On April 9, 2010, the day Audreanna Zimmerman's body finally gave up the fight, her killers were led away in chains. The legal fallout was a mosaic of broken lives and systemic failure. Heather Lee, desperate to avoid the needle, took a plea deal for 25 years, claiming she was merely an unwilling witness despite her presence at every stage of the torture. Brittany Miller, protected from the death penalty only by her status as a minor, was sentenced to life in prison. She was a girl raised in a laboratory of violence by her own mother, eventually becoming the very monster she had been taught to admire. In June 2012, Tina Brown stood before a jury. Her defense team attempted to use her own history of childhood abuse as a shield, painting her as a victim of her environment. But the medical experts and the jury saw the truth. Tina had acted with cold, logical, and premeditated purpose. There was no cloud of insanity, only a total, chilling absence of empathy. The recommendation for death was unanimous. Before the sentence was handed down, Tina offered a hollow, whispered apology, admitting that Audreanna did not deserve to die. It was a rare, fleeting moment of truth in a life built on shadows and violence. The story of Audreanna Zimmerman is more than a true crime tragedy. It is a testament to the sheer, unbreakable strength of the human spirit. She was a mother who literally crawled through hell to ensure that justice found the people who put her there. It serves as a grim, permanent reminder that while we may be products of our past, we remain the sole architects of our actions. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe. See you next time. Daisy Coleman was the personification of the American dream. A gifted athlete, a brilliant mind, and a girl whose grace seemed to light up every hallway she walked. But behind the effortless smile and the vibrant future lay a story that would eventually shatter a community and spark a movement. This is the story of a life that was supposed to be a triumph, but became a battle for justice. To those who knew her, Daisy was more than just a talented student. She possessed a sharp, inquisitive intellect, often masked by a quiet, unassuming kindness. Before we tell her story, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. Your support allows us to keep sharing these vital narratives. Yet this alluring exterior was a fragile shell. Beneath the surface, Daisy harbored a spirit that had already been tempered by fire. From a tender age, she had navigated harrowing experiences that had forced her to grow up far too quickly. She carried herself with a maturity that was born of survival, a quiet strength that belied the internal struggles she fought every single day. She was a girl who had already looked tragedy in the eye and refused to blink, until the night the world decided to break her. The cracks in Daisy's world first appeared in 2009. At the time, the Colemans were a family of status and warmth living in Albany, Missouri. Her father, Michael, was a dedicated physician. Her mother, Melinda, a veterinarian. Daisy was the heart of the home, the only daughter among 3 younger brothers. The nightmare began on a desolate road while the family was en route to a wrestling tournament. In a split second of metal and glass, their car struck an unforeseen obstruction and hurtled into a deep ravine. The accident was catastrophic, claiming the life of Michael Coleman instantly. Left as the sole head of the household, Melinda moved her children to the larger city of Maryville, hoping that a change of scenery would offer a sanctuary for their grief. She stepped into the role of a single parent with a fierce, protective energy, grappling with the immense responsibility of raising 3 boys and a daughter, who was quietly drowning in the memory of her father's loss. They were a family trying to heal, unaware that Maryville would soon become the site of a much more sinister trauma. The morning of January 8, 2012 felt like the end of the world. It was 5 a.m., and the Missouri winter had turned lethal. The temperature had plummeted to a bone-chilling 0 operator F, a cold so sharp it felt like a blade against the skin. In the pre-dawn darkness of the Coleman yard, 14-year-old Daisy woke up. She wasn't in her bed. She was lying in the snow. Her state was beyond bewilderment. It was a total sensory shutdown. Her hair, still damp from the night before, was literally frozen to the frozen earth, acting as a macabre anchor. She was clad only in a t-shirt and athletic pants, no shoes, no socks, no protection. As the realization of her surroundings seeped into her consciousness, a single, haunting thought echoed in her mind. "I must be dead." She tried to scream, but her throat was a desert of ice. She tried to move, but her limbs felt like leaden weights. With the last remnants of her will, she began a desperate, agonizing crawl toward the front door. She reached the threshold and began to pound, not with her hands, which were numb and white, but with the sheer force of a dying girl's instinct to live. Inside, Melinda Coleman was jolted from a deep sleep. The sound was strange, a dull, rhythmic thudding. She initially mistook it for their dog seeking refuge from the lethal cold. Wrapped in a robe, she made her way to the door, expecting to see pets. When she swung the door open, the sight was a physical blow to her soul. Her daughter Daisy was sprawled across the doorstep, fading in and out of consciousness. The sharp, cloying scent of alcohol rose from her body like a toxic cloud. Daisy couldn't speak. She could only weep, her tears freezing almost instantly on her cheeks. Melinda's veterinary and medical instincts screamed into action. She called for her sons, who rushed down to lift their sister's rigid, hypothermic body. As they brought her into the warmth, the panic in the room was suffocating. Melinda began to undress her daughter, and that's when the accident theory died. Daisy's legs were a map of trauma, not just the pale, waxy skin of severe frostbite, but deep, angry bruising and jagged red marks that spoke of a violent struggle. Using her medical knowledge, Melinda placed Daisy in a bathtub, meticulously monitoring the water temperature. She knew that warming her too fast could cause cardiac arrest. As the ice melted from Daisy's hair, the girl began to mutter disjointed, terrifying fragments of a story that made no sense. Terrified and realizing her daughter had been the victim of a brutal crime, Melinda dialed 911. As the police arrived, Daisy's mind remained a fractured kaleidoscope of alcohol and trauma. The narrative of the night had to be pieced together by her best friend, Paige, who had been sleeping in Daisy's room. The evening of Saturday, January 7th, had started with the reckless innocence of youth. The two girls had watched horror movies and sipped on wine secretly taken from the Coleman liquor cabinet. But the atmosphere shifted when Daisy's phone buzzed. It was a text from 17-year-old Matthew Barnett. Barnett was Maryville royalty, a popular soccer star with a powerful family name. He invited the girls to his house for some fun. To a 14-year-old girl seeking acceptance, it was an invitation she couldn't refuse. Around 1 a.m., the girls snuck out through the bedroom window, meeting Matthew and 4 of his friends in the shadows. They were led into the Barnett basement through a window, told to keep their voices down so as not to wake Matthew's parents sleeping peacefully. The fun Matthew promised was a calculated trap. According to Paige's testimony, as soon as they entered the basement, Matthew began a systematic campaign of plying Daisy with drink after drink. He didn't just offer them, he pushed them. Daisy, wanting to fit in, drank until she lost her footing on reality. While Paige was led into a separate room by another boy, Nicholas, Daisy was isolated with Matthew in a room containing a large bed. The door was not fully closed and Paige caught flashes of the horror unfolding. Daisy was lying on the bed, paralyzed, her eyes rolling back, unable to form words or push him away. Matthew Barnett took advantage of her total incapacitation. But the cruelty didn't stop at the assault. His friend, Jordan Z., stood in the room, his face illuminated by the glow of his smartphone as he filmed the entire violation. It was a digital trophy, a way to immortalize Daisy's destruction. By 2 a.m., the boys decided the party was over. They drove the girls back to the Coleman house, but their final act was the most callous of all. They told Paige to go inside first, lying to her that they would stay with Daisy to help her sober up in the fresh air. Paige, young and trusting, climbed back into the house and fell into a heavy sleep. Outside, the boys watched as Daisy was overcome by nausea. They propped her up and held her hair back as she vomited, not out of a sense of care, but to ensure she didn't soil their clothes or their car. Once she was empty and drifting into a deep alcohol-induced coma, they stripped her of her shoes. They took her bag, they took her mobile phone. They laid the 14-year-old girl, barefoot and semi-conscious, on the frozen earth of her front yard. They looked at her one last time, knowing the temperature was dropping to 0 ring operator F, and they drove away. For 3 hours, Daisy Coleman was a ghost in the snow, her life hanging by a thread, left to die by the very boys she thought were her friends. When the police conducted their search, the evidence was a trail of discarded life. 5 plastic alcohol bottles in her room, and outside in the snow, her shoes, her bag, and the frozen remnants of her struggle to survive. That morning, Daisy Coleman was rushed to the hospital for an emergency medical evaluation. Doctors documented bruises on her legs and clear signs of trauma in her genital area. Toxicology tests revealed her blood alcohol level was nearly twice the legal limit. Daisy remained unconscious for hours. When she finally woke up, she remembered nothing about the previous night. She admitted she had consumed a large amount of alcohol, taken without permission from her mother's cabinet, and confessed that she had secretly left home to visit a boy's house. Beyond that, her memory was completely blank. By 11 a.m. on January 8th, just hours after the incident, police had located and detained Matthew Barnett, Jordan Z., and Nicholas Goudas. All 3 were brought in for questioning. During his interrogation, Matthew Barnett admitted that he had sexual intercourse with Daisy that night but insisted it had been consensual. He claimed that Daisy and her friend Paige were already intoxicated when he met them, and initially denied giving Daisy any alcohol. As the questioning continued, his story began to unravel. Faced with inconsistencies, Matthew eventually admitted that he had given Daisy several shots of alcohol, saying he did so to melt her cold heart. He stated that he used a condom and disposed of it by throwing it out of the car window while driving Daisy back home. Jordan Z. at first refused to testify, but later confessed that he had used Nicholas's phone to record a short video, about 10 seconds long. showing Matthew kissing Daisy. Jordan admitted he showed the video to friends before panicking and deleting it. The footage was never recovered, despite multiple classmates claiming they had seen it. Nicholas Gudas, who had coerced Daisy's friend Paige into sexual activity, was the only one to immediately plead guilty and was sent to a juvenile detention center. The driver that night, a friend of Matthew, later told police that during the ride to Daisy's house, she was crying continuously. He also said Matthew appeared more concerned about Daisy's brother finding out than about Daisy herself. Investigators soon discovered that just days before the incident, Matthew had visited the Coleman family home and shared a friendly dinner with them. At 1 p.m. on January 8th, police searched the basement of Matthew Barnett's house, seizing bed linens, empty bottles, men's underwear, and plastic cups. Yet during later interrogations, a disturbing shift occurred. A deputy sheriff appeared sympathetic toward Matthew, at one point suggesting that some girls seek attention through their actions and that this might be one of those cases. He even praised Matthew for driving Daisy home, overlooking the fact that she had been left alone outside unconscious in freezing temperatures. Days later, Daisy physically recovered, but her memory never returned. By March 2012, only 2 months after the incident, all charges against Matthew Barnett and Jordan Z were dropped. The district attorney ruled that the encounter had been consensual. The deleted video was never recovered. Phone examinations revealed sporadic communication between Daisy and Matthew, including messages that prosecutors interpreted as suggesting sexual willingness in exchange for alcohol, as well as explicit messages exchanged prior to January 8th. Only after Matthew's release did the public learn that he was the grandson of Rex Barnett, a powerful Missouri politician with deep connections to law enforcement and prosecutors. Matthew and Jordan returned to their normal lives. Daisy did not. At school, Daisy was labeled a liar and a promiscuous troublemaker. Most of her peers sided with Matthew. She withdrew from social life, abandoned sports and dancing, and left the cheerleading squad. Her mother, Melinda, was subjected to anonymous threats at home and at work, eventually forcing her to resign from her longtime job at a veterinary clinic. In 2013, the Coleman family moved away. Soon after, their vacant home mysteriously burned down. The cause was never determined. Not long after, the house belonging to Daisy's friend Paige also burned. As national attention grew, Daisy managed to reopen the case. In the end, Matthew Barnett was found guilty of only one charge, leaving Daisy exposed to freezing temperatures. He received 2 years of probation and was ordered to pay $1,800 in restitution. No further charges were pursued. In 2016, the Netflix documentary Audrey and Daisy was released, exposing the devastating consequences of sexual violence, bullying, and online harassment. Alongside Daisy's story was that of Audrey Pott, a California teenager who, after enduring similar abuse and public humiliation, took her own life. Her attackers received minimal sentences, though her family later won a civil settlement. In 2018, Daisy moved to Colorado in an attempt to start over. She worked at a tattoo parlor and became involved in a film project about her healing journey. That same year, tragedy struck again when her mother and brother were involved in a car accident. Her 19-year-old brother Tristan was killed under circumstances that remain unclear. Daisy publicly admitted she was struggling to keep her pain hidden and to maintain the appearance that she was okay. Daisy co-founded a non-profit organization to support victims of violence and continued to speak openly about her trauma, panic attacks, and relentless nightmares. In 2020, she told friends and police that an unknown man had been stalking her and sending threats. She begged for help, but her concerns were dismissed. On August 4, 2020, Daisy posted online that she was terrified to leave her home, unable to eat or sleep. She later wrote that a man had come to her door, that her photos had been stolen, and that a fake profile offering sexual services had been created in her name. Police conducted a welfare check that afternoon and found nothing alarming. Shortly after they left, Daisy video called her boyfriend, took out a gun, and pulled the trigger. When officers returned that evening, they found her dead. Her mother, Melinda, later wrote that Daisy never recovered from what those boys had done to her. 4 months after Daisy's death, Melinda Coleman took her own life as well. Only Daisy's brothers remained. Matthew Barnett's life and career continued without consequence. He offered condolences. For Daisy Coleman, justice never came. If this story made you think, if it shocked you, or if it left you searching for answers, don't forget to support the channel. Subscribe for more true crime stories, like the video to help it reach more people, and share it so this story is never forgotten. Thank you for watching. Stay curious and stay aware. Pray that I return alive. These were the chilling and prophetic final words Samia Shahid whispered to her closest friends before boarding a flight to Pakistan in July 2016. At 28 years old, this vibrant British Pakistani woman was traveling to visit her supposedly ailing father. But beneath the veneer of a family emergency lay a lethal tension. The story of Samia Shahid is not merely a local tragedy. It is a global indictment of patriarchal control and the devastating consequences of living between two worlds. It forces us to confront the question of whether a woman truly has the right to control her own life, or if family honor remains more valuable than a human soul. Born on November 15, 1987, in the industrial heart of Bradford, West Yorkshire, Samia grew up in the epicenter of the UK's South Asian diaspora. Bradford is the sixth largest city in England, a vibrant tapestry of cultures, where thousands of families of Pakistani origin have built a life over several decades. The Shahid family, led by her father Chaudhry Muhammad and her mother Imtiaz, had emigrated from the small village of Pandori in Pakistan, seeking a future of prosperity. Samia and her sister Medea grew up as second-generation immigrants, constantly oscillating between the modern values of British society and the ancient, rigid traditions of their ancestral homeland. The Shahid family was well known and highly respected in Bradford, operating a successful limousine and car rental business, while other relatives owned local shops and landmarks. Samia was a friendly, cheerful, and lively girl who was famously known as a daddy's girl, willing to do almost anything to maintain the affection of her father. Despite receiving a Western education and enjoying the freedoms of the UK, the family remained deeply devoted to their Sunni Muslim faith and strict cultural codes. While Samia loved the thrill of driving fast cars and taking care of her appearance with makeup and fashion, she lived a complex and often fractured dual life. In 2012, when Samia turned 25, her parents decided that her period of Western independence had to come to an end for the sake of the family's social standing. Her mother insisted she travel to Pakistan to enter an arranged marriage, a practice that remains a cornerstone of social life within their traditionalist community. Samia agreed to the proposal not out of a personal desire for the union, but out of a deep-seated fear of disappointing the parents she loved so dearly. In February 2012, it was formally decided she would marry her first cousin, Chaudhry Muhammad Shakil, a man she had known since childhood. The choice of Shakil was deeply strategic, aimed at keeping property and land ownership within the family, despite his volatile history and a recent prison sentence for a shooting. To prepare for the wedding, Samia's father spared no expense, purchasing magnificent silk outfits and expensive jewelry to distract her from the reality of her impending situation. Deep down, however, Samia realized that no amount of gold could compensate for the lack of love she felt for a man she viewed only as a brother. On her way to the airport, she admitted to a friend via text that she was making the most catastrophic mistake of her entire life. The wedding was a massive, lavish 4-day ceremony in Pakistan with over 1,000 guests, followed by the couple moving into a private house gifted by her wealthy father. Samia struggled immensely to reconcile with her new life in the rural village of Pandori, and managed to return to England after only 4 months. Because their marriage was a nikah ceremony not registered under British civil law, it lacked the legal protections and recognition required in the United Kingdom. Upon her return to Bradford, friends noticed she had become a shell of her former self, feeling constantly monitored by Shakil through aggressive daily video calls. By the summer of 2014, Samia was sending desperate voice notes stating she no longer wished to be Shakil's wife, and felt a growing sense of hopelessness and despair. Her life changed forever when she met Syed Mukhtar Kazim, known as Ali, a kind and supportive man who lived in Dubai and shared her modern outlook. Ali represented the life she had always dreamed of, and the two quickly realized that their connection was powerful enough to risk everything for a chance at happiness. Samia knew that to be with Ali, she had to successfully navigate a complex and dangerous religious divorce from Shakil under strict Sharia principles. Samia eventually converted to Shia Islam and testified before a religious cleric that her first marriage had been a forced union, conducted under extreme psychological and family pressure. After Shakil refused to provide his version of events, the marriage was declared invalid, allowing Samia and Ali to marry secretly in a ceremony in Leeds in 2014. For a brief moment, Samia felt a sense of profound liberation, finally glowing with the genuine happiness she had been denied during her first arranged marriage. However, this peace was short-lived when she was brutally attacked in an alleyway by men wielding metal rods, an assault that targeted only her. The attack was a clear warning from those who believed she had brought shame upon the Shahid name by choosing her own path and her own husband. During a recorded phone call, her mother unleashed a barrage of insults and threats, revealing that the family's love was entirely conditional on Samia's total and absolute obedience. Samia felt like a prisoner in her own community, suffocated by the web of imposed principles and the rigid, unforgiving expectations of her parents and extended kin. Her secret life with Ali became her only sanctuary, but the cultural pull of her family continued to exert a dangerous influence over her actions. In July 2016, the ultimate trap was set when she was manipulated into believing her father was on his deathbed, prompting her final journey back to Pakistan. Despite her husband's desperate pleas for her to stay safe in Dubai, her lingering devotion to her father drove her back to the village of Pandori. On July 20, 2016, Samia was found dead in her family home, a victim of a brutal honor killing designed to erase her perceived transgressions. Her death was initially dismissed as natural causes, but a secondary autopsy proved she had been strangled to death by the very people she loved. The pressure of the Shahid family was relentless, as they refused to acknowledge the validity of Samia's divorce or her second marriage to Ali. They claimed the Islamic Sharia Council possessed no legal authority in the UK or Pakistan, viewing her as still legally bound to her cousin Shakil. Her mother, Imtiaz, was particularly vocal in her disapproval, repeatedly insulting her daughter and demanding she return to her senses rather than disgrace the family legacy. Ali hoped the tension would subside once he returned to Dubai, yet the newlyweds were acutely aware that Bradford was no longer safe for them. They understood that in their community, profound family disapproval could often lead to irreversible and violent tragedies. Fortunately, Samia secured a visa for Dubai that same month, assisted by a small circle of friends who helped her secretly purchase a plane ticket. This was a monumental and agonizing decision for her, as it meant openly defying the family she had loved and obeyed her entire life. As soon as she fled, her parents reported her missing to the police, refusing to accept that she had exercised her own free will. They viewed her relationship with Ali as nothing more than adultery, and even went as far as to threaten the cleric who granted the divorce. Mr. Kazim, the cleric, was forced to seek police protection as the Shahid family's rage began to spill over into the local community. In Dubai, Samia finally experienced a life of genuine freedom and profound happiness, sharing her joy openly with her followers on social media platforms. She spent her days driving, cooking, and dreaming of the moment she and Ali would finally become parents and start a family of their own. Despite her newfound liberty, she remained tethered to her roots in Bradford and continued to communicate with her parents almost every single day. She desperately wanted them to accept Ali and understand that her marriage to Shakil had been an unbearable burden she could no longer carry. Her greatest wish was for her father to embrace her new life, but Chaudhry Muhammad remained cold and unreachable. Muhammad eventually contacted Ali directly, not to offer peace, but to demand that he leave Samia alone and release her from their union. Ali stood his ground, asserting that Samia was his legal wife and that he would never renounce the woman he loved for the sake of an outdated code. In the eyes of the Shahids, Ali was an outsider and a threat. largely because he was not a Sunni Muslim and had married Samia secretly. To them, this was a public humiliation that would cause the entire community to point fingers at the Shahid name for years to come. The family's reputation was placed on a pedestal, far above the actual happiness or safety of their own daughter. In June 2016, a shadow fell over Samia's life when she learned that her aunt Shakil's mother had passed away in their ancestral village in Pakistan. Although she felt a deep urge to attend the funeral, she acknowledged the immense risk involved in returning to a place where so many held a grudge. Ali and her friends advised her to stay in the safety of Dubai, and for a time she listened to their cautious and sensible warnings. However, the trap was soon reset when her mother and sister called with news that her father's health was failing due to severe diabetes. They claimed he had very little time left and begged her to return home for one final, tearful goodbye. The guilt of potentially losing her father without a reconciliation was too much for Samia to bear, and she made the fateful choice to travel. Ali was devastated by her decision and felt a sense of impending doom, yet he knew he could not forbid her from seeing a dying parent. Her sister Medea had already booked the ticket, leaving Samia with a sense that her journey back to Pakistan was an unavoidable destiny. As Ali drove her to the airport, he offered her one last chance to turn back, but she insisted that she would be fine. Before the plane took off, she sent a haunting text to a friend: "Pray that I return alive." On July 20, 2016, the silence from Samia's phone became deafening, and Ali's messages remained unread as a cold dread began to settle in his heart. That evening, Chaudhry Muhammad called the Pandori police to report that his daughter had died after a tragic and accidental fall down the stairs. When authorities arrived, they found Samia's lifeless body at the bottom of the staircase, her face covered with a black scarf and foam at her mouth. Muhammad claimed she had been living there with her husband Shakil, who was nowhere to be found when the police began their initial walkthrough. Her mother and sister arrived shortly after, and the family pushed for a rapid burial. Following Muslim tradition, the family buried Samia almost immediately, a move that effectively destroyed much of the physical evidence before a thorough investigation could begin. Conflicting reports began to circulate, with some family members claiming a heart attack or asthma, while local news suggested she had tragically committed suicide. Ali refused to believe these lies and flew to Pakistan, moving straight to the police station to report that his wife had been murdered. He told the investigators the true story of her escape from Shakil and the family's fury, which finally forced the local authorities to reconsider the case. An autopsy eventually revealed a bruise on her neck, proving she had been strangled. The investigation took a dramatic turn when British MP Naz Shah intervened, writing directly to the Prime Minister of Pakistan to demand a transparent and honest inquiry. This political pressure led to the arrest of Shakil and Chaudhry Muhammad, who were both brought in for questioning regarding the mysterious circumstances of the death. Shakil eventually confessed to the authorities, admitting that he had raped Samia and then strangled her with her own scarf when she refused to stay. He was enraged that she had successfully escaped him and ruined his chances of obtaining a British visa through their original marriage. The truth of the honor killing was finally beginning to surface. Investigators believed that as Shakil strangled Samia, her father held her legs down to ensure she could not struggle or escape her grim fate. Despite the confession and the overwhelming evidence of foul play, the legal system in Pakistan proved to be a difficult and frustrating hurdle for justice. Shakil was eventually released on bail in 2018, and Samia's father died in a hospital before he could ever be fully held accountable for his role. Her mother and sister remained in the UK, offering a completely different narrative that painted Ali as a villain and Samia as a victim of poverty. In the end, Samia's life was extinguished by the very people she loved. Samia Shahid was a woman who dared to dream of a life defined by love, not by tradition. Her story remains a heartbreaking testament to the dangers many still face when they seek the simple right to choose their own destiny, While Samia's voice was silenced, her legacy continues to spark a global conversation about justice and human rights. But we cannot let stories like hers fade into silence. If you believe these stories need to be told, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Sharing this video is also a powerful way to raise awareness and ensure that Samia's name. On the late afternoon of May 19, 2018, 24-year-old Jastine Valdez was moving through the quiet, rhythmic motions of a life built on discipline and hope. She was a young woman of bright intelligence and deep familial roots, spending her morning navigating the cold gray corridors of bureaucracy to renew her Irish residency permit, a vital document for her future as an accounting student. Once the paperwork was filed, she headed to the gym, seeking the familiar release of a rigorous physical workout. At exactly 4:20 p.m., Jastine walked out of the fitness center, the sun still high and golden over the rolling hills of County Wicklow, and prepared to make her way home. As she began her commute, a simple domestic tether reached out to her, a text message from her mother, Teresita. It was a mundane request, the kind shared between thousands of families every single day. She asked her daughter to buy some bread on her way home. Jastine, ever the dutiful and loving daughter, did not hesitate for a second. She stopped at a local store, completed the small errand, and tucked the bag of fresh bread under her arm. She then made her way to the bus stop to board the number 185 bus, a familiar vessel that would carry her toward the coastal town of Bray and eventually to the gates of her village. By 6 p.m., the bus hissed to a halt in the picturesque, tranquil village of Enniskerry, a location renowned for its lush greenery and cozy, welcoming atmosphere. It was a place where people felt inherently safe, where the doors were often left unlocked and the neighbors knew each other by name. Jastine stepped off the bus, the fresh evening air hitting her face as she began the final leg of her journey. Her home was located in a secluded rural pocket of the area. The walk from the bus stop was not a mere stroll, but a 15 to 20-minute trek along winding, narrow roads lined with thick, ancient hedges. For a young, vibrant, and active woman like Jastine, this was a routine she embraced almost every day of the week. She knew every bend in the road, every rustle of the trees, and every farmhouse along the way. But as the clock slowly ticked past 6:30 p.m., the silence at the Valdez home became deafening. Teresita stood by the window, her eyes fixed on the driveway, waiting for the familiar silhouette of her daughter to appear against the twilight. Jastine was a girl of remarkable habit. She lived in constant contact with her parents, informing them of literally every step she took throughout the day. In fact, that day alone, she and her mother had exchanged 63 text messages. When the calls started going straight to voicemail and the messages remained unread, a cold, visceral anxiety took hold of Teresita's heart. Driven by a surge of adrenaline and a growing sense of dread, Teresita bolted from the house and into the cooling evening air. She ran toward the bus stop, her voice echoing through the rural silence as she desperately called Jastine's name into the shadows. Along the way, she encountered neighbors and strangers, frantically showing them a photo of her daughter on her phone. Because of Jastine's striking Asian features and her athletic attire, gray leggings, a white t-shirt, sneakers, and a dark jacket, she was easy for the locals to remember. Passers-by confirmed the haunting reality. They had seen her get off the bus and head toward the house, but after she turned the corner into the more isolated stretch of the road, she had simply evaporated. In a state of suffocating desperation, the family contacted the Gardaí to report the disappearance. Detectives immediately began a dual-track investigation, scouring her digital footprint and her personal history. First, they looked into Jastine's private life, searching for any possible reason a young woman might choose to disappear of her own volition. They found a portrait of a girl who was a beacon of stability and ambition. Born in the Philippines, Jastine had lived with relatives while her parents worked tirelessly in Ireland as a housekeeper and a gardener for a wealthy estate. In 2015, they finally saved enough to bring her to Ireland. Jastine repaid their sacrifice with total devotion, working part-time as a waitress and a babysitter to help with the bills while studying accounting. The runaway theory was discarded within hours. As the sun began to set over the horizon, the investigation received its first chilling and significant breakthrough. A female motorist driving with her 12-year-old son contacted the police with a report that sounded like a scene from a terrifying fever dream. She described seeing a black Nissan Qashqai pulled over on the side of the road with its headlights extinguished and the engine idling. As she slowed down to investigate the vehicle, she saw a man violently struggling to shove a screaming Asian girl into the trunk of the car. The witness was paralyzed with fear, especially for the immediate safety of her young child, and she drove to a safe distance before dialing the emergency services. Shortly after this call, a second witness came forward with an equally disturbing account. He had seen the same black Nissan driving erratically through the narrow lanes. As he looked into the vehicle, he saw a girl in the back seat, her palms pressed hard against the glass, tapping frantically in a silent, desperate plea for help. By 7:20 p.m., a third driver reported a suspicious car driving wildly about 6 kilometers away from the village of Enniskerry. When patrol officers arrived at the coordinates of the first struggle, they made a heartbreaking discovery on the grassy verge. Jastine's shattered mobile phone and the bag of bread she had bought for her mother, discarded and forgotten in the dirt. This discovery confirmed the worst fears of the investigators and the family. The hunt for the black Nissan became a high-stakes, multi-agency manhunt, involving local patrols, helicopters, and specialized tactical units. The registration of the vehicle led them directly to 40-year-old Mark Hennessy. To the outside world, Hennessy was the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing, a man who blended perfectly into the fabric of suburban life. He was a model family man, a husband, and a father of 2 young daughters, the youngest of whom was only 8 months old. He worked as an estimator for a construction firm and lived in an affluent neighborhood where crime was almost unheard of. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, and no problems with the law. However, the digital and forensic trail began to tell a much darker story. When police visited his home, his wife Nicola revealed that he had left for a bar at 5:30 p.m. to relax after work and had never returned. CCTV footage from the bar showed him looking anxious, sweating, and completely out of sorts, staying only for a few minutes before leaving. But the most damning evidence came from the surveillance cameras on the very bus Jastine had taken home that afternoon. The footage revealed a terrifying truth. Hennessy's black Nissan had been lurking behind the number 185 bus for over 30 minutes. He had not just happened upon Jastine in a moment of random opportunity. He had been stalking her, following the bus like a predator shadowing its prey, waiting for the exact moment she stepped off into the isolation of the rural road. The air in County Wicklow grew heavy as the search for the missing student and the black Nissan Qashqai entered its most desperate phase. Investigators were now certain that the disappearances of the innocent girl and the suburban father were inextricably linked, officially naming Mark Hennessy as the prime suspect in a calculated abduction. Tracking him proved to be a digital ghost hunt, as Hennessy repeatedly toggled his cell phone on and off to evade the grid. In a chilling moment of finality, he called his wife one last time to deliver a cryptic, haunting message. He was never coming home again. It was later revealed that he had even briefly met with his own family during his flight. They had pleaded with him, through tears, to surrender to the authorities, but he had coldly refused before vanishing back into the shadows. Hennessy was playing a deadly game of cat and mouse, always managing to stay one step ahead of the perimeter the police were trying to establish. Realizing they were losing precious time, the Gardaí turned to the public, flooding the media with images of Jastine, the suspect, and the vehicle. The strategy worked almost instantly when a vigilant woman, who had just heard the emergency press conference, spotted a matching Nissan Qashqai on the road. With nerves of steel, she followed the car to a car park in Cherrywood, confirming the driver's identity before alerting the police. When the officers descended upon the vehicle, they were met with a scene of pure carnage. Hennessy sat behind the wheel, drenched in his own blood, wielding a knife with the manic intensity of a man who had already decided his own fate. The confrontation turned lethal in a heartbeat as Hennessy lunged at the officers, forcing them to discharge their firearms to neutralize the threat. A single bullet struck him in the shoulder, and as they dragged his conscious body from the car, the officer's first frantic question was not about his health, but about Jastine's location. To their horror, the car was empty. Medics fought to stabilize Hennessy, but the situation took a tragic turn at the hospital when it was discovered the bullet had ricocheted, causing a fatal head injury. He died shortly after, taking his secrets to the grave. The blood covering him had been self-inflicted. He had slashed his own arms and neck with a knife, choosing a coward's exit over the reality of facing justice for the girl he had stolen. While the suspect was dead, the target remained missing, leaving the investigators in a state of grim frustration until they searched the blood-spattered interior of the Nissan. There, they found a frantic handwritten note, its words partially obscured by the dark stains of Hennessy's suicide attempt. Through the crimson smears, the officers were able to decipher two chilling phrases: "Sorry" and "Pease Castle." It was a map from a monster. Though the hope of finding Jastine alive was fading with every passing second, the search parties converged on a dense wooded area in South Dublin near the indicated landmark. On May 21st, the nightmare reached its conclusion. First, they found her purse and identification. Then, deep within the undergrowth, they discovered the broken body of the girl who had only wanted to buy bread for her mother. The autopsy revealed a narrative of unspeakable cruelty, confirming that Jastine had been murdered on the very evening she was taken. The cause of death was determined to be manual strangulation, and the medical examiner confirmed the presence of a brutal sexual assault. A strange detail emerged during the toxicology report. Trace amounts of illegal substances were found in Jastine's system, though they appeared to have been introduced after her death. Hennessy, meanwhile, was found to have been heavily under the influence of the same substances. It appeared his private life had been a crumbling facade. A man drowning in debt and substance abuse, he had been using dating apps like Tinder to prowl for women, and was known by bar patrons as a predator who masked his darkness with a suburban smile. Forensic science provided the final, undeniable link when Hennessy's DNA was found on Jastine's body, confirming every suspicion held by the detectives. While the crime initially appeared to be a random act of opportunity, further analysis of the GPS data and phone records revealed a much more sinister reality. Hennessy had traveled Jastine's exact route many times before, always at the same hour. This was not a spontaneous tragedy, it was a long-term stalking. He had been watching her for weeks, studying her schedule and memorizing the lonely stretches of her walk, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. On that Saturday, he didn't just leave the bar to drive. He left with the explicit purpose of hunting the girl he had been obsessing over from the shadows. The community of Enniskerry was left shattered by the revelation that such a monster had been living in their midst. In a heartbreaking farewell ceremony, the village came together to honor the girl who had become a symbol of lost innocence. White balloons were released into the Irish sky, and her loved ones wore pink shirts emblazoned with her smile. A stark contrast to the darkness of her final hours. Jastine's parents eventually brought their only daughter back to her homeland in the Philippines to be buried, They remained there for several years to grieve in peace, but eventually returned to Ireland in 2021. Seeking a fresh start and a way to escape the ghosts of Wicklow, they moved to a new city, trying to build a future in the land where their daughter's dreams had been so cruelly extinguished. Share your opinion in the comments, and also put likes if this story seemed interesting to you. But don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. See you soon.